So my name is Tom Fox, and I'm the former editor and publisher at the National Catholic Reporter and currently editor-publisher emeritus. And I'm here today speaking with Frank Butler, who has just written a pretty amazing book, Belonging, One Catholic's Journey. And so we're going to take a few minutes just to talk about that book and about that journey. Frank, tell me a little bit about your own background, your own faith journey.
Thank you, Tom. Well, first thing to say is that I'm a baby boomer, the second of 6 children, educated in parochial schools in Virginia and Florida, and then studied for the priesthood for 8 years, about the time of the Second Vatican Council. I was only 13 years of age when I entered the seminary, but I was eager to learn. The seminary was located in Little Rock during high school integration crisis there. Seminarians were very active in civil rights and social change because of the surrounding environment, and also because of the young, well-educated priests who staffed the seminary and were great at testing the status quo. One particular story, we had a mission in the mountains of Mexico, where seminarians lived and worked during the summer. And I had a very wonderful experience there, living with the villagers and watching them cope with everything from hunger to even death. It touched me very deeply as a teenager. And so my seminary work was not abstract. It opened me up in a lifelong desire to work for social change. My understanding of faith deepened there and in a way that served me well throughout my life. Nevertheless, after college, I had left the seminary during the first year of graduate studies at the Catholic University of America. I actually realized I had my mother's vocation to the priesthood and not my own. And I think that was a very common thing back then when the seminaries were filled. Well, I met my wife, Fran, at Catholic U. We married eventually and started a family, and I worked my way through graduate degrees in theology as a layperson. And I landed a job at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And after 8 years there, for the rest of my professional career, I would lead a group of lay people who were Catholic philanthropists. My faith is very important to me. It grounds me and keeps me connected to good people. My wife is also an active Catholic, and we support each other's faith life. We belong to a vibrant Catholic parish here in Washington, D.C.
Well, that's quite a story of a faith journey. I'm sure it's one that many NCR readers share in a sense of the same time frame of the living through that post-Vatican Council era and growing to adulthood in that period. Now, tell me, tell me a little bit about your time briefly with Call to Action in '76, and then Fatica as president.
Okay, so my position at the Catholic Bishops' Conference was director of the Office of Domestic Social Development. So I was in charge of helping the bishops advocate in the nation's capital for anti-poverty legislation and labor rights legislation, open housing policies, universal health care, civil rights enforcement, anti-capital punishment efforts, and so forth. Well, I did that. The US bishops conducted a very large consultation on social justice in the diocese and in the parishes of the United States on the occasion of the nation's bicentennial anniversary. That was called Call to Action. And it was led by the late Detroit Cardinal John Dearden. I staffed the Call to Action as its executive director. So in the 1980s, I went on to work as president of Fatica. It's foundations and donors interested in Catholic activities. It's a group comprised of many of the largest Catholic foundations in the country. And then for 3 decades, we worked on church renewal and change.
Frank, working with the bishops through your position on the staff there, and then later through Fatica, you've probably, as a layperson, you've had 3 or 4 decades of real close-up work with seeing the inside of the church. And in your book, one of the themes that you present is the frustrations that you felt and some of the issues that came up in that process. Can you speak a little bit more about that, because it's such an important issue today in terms of how laity and clergy either act or don't act together?
Sure. Well, ironically, even though when I worked for the bishops, they were asking me to advocate for social change and national policies to improve healthcare or to advance civil rights. When the discussion turned on social change as applied to the church's own operations, the conversation became very difficult. And that challenge increased significantly in the years that I served as the president of Fatica. One example, the foundations funded the original research that uncovered the multi-billion-dollar liability that thousands of aging nuns, brothers, and priests faced as they began to retire in great numbers in the early 1980s. This was the result of not paying them properly during the golden years of our parochial education. Fatica, with the religious leadership organizations, developed a plan to address the problem, but we were rebuffed by the bishops. The bishops felt that the retirement funding was primarily the responsibility of the religious communities themselves and not their responsibility. From a legal point of view, that might have been right, but not from a moral point of view or from the point of view of justice. And then through grassroots organizing and pressure in the press and persistence, we succeeded in getting the bishops to start a national parish collection that has greatly helped religious throughout the country. We founded another charity called SOAR, Support Our Aging Religious, which provides grants to religious communities for their medical needs related to aging. Now, a second example of the bishop's resistance to change came in the beginning of the 1990s when the Soviet Union saw its last days. And in a short time, new possibilities for religious worship and freedom in that part of the world were very much on our mind as Catholic donors. So Fatica proposed a bold program of church-to-church aid under the US bishops. But we didn't get anywhere. One prominent cardinal dismissed the whole thing, saying, "Pastors don't want another charitable collection." Well, we ended up taking 35 of the US bishops at our cost on tours of Russia, the Baltics, Ukraine, and other European countries. They were deeply moved by the people that they met who were part of the underground church in that part of the world, who suffered great torment and prison for their religious beliefs. So a short time after that, they convinced their fellow US bishops to agree to a new collection that has contributed now hundreds of millions of dollars for the rebuilding of the church in Eastern and Central Europe and in parts of Russia. Whenever we approached the US bishops, we almost always got a no or a patronizing pat on the head. And that included our experience with the Vatican as well. Bishops have a no reflex when it comes to lay initiative. That has caused many to walk away. And I understand that frustration. Years ago, historian John Tracy Ellis, an expert on early US Catholicism, said that lay people should appreciate more the power of their purse strings and use them. We were conscious of this, and it allowed us over time to succeed in having our voices heard.
So one of the questions that comes up is the whole question of accountability. And what you make the point in your book that you frequently ran into situations where the bishops just would not allow themselves to be held accountable, and lay lay people didn't want to give under those circumstances. Why? What can be done, or how do you see this issue of the lack of accountability? Because I think that another point you make in the book is that overlaps with the same kind of sense of privilege and that has allowed the whole sexual abuse thing to continue, where they don't feel accountable to the laity. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, do you have insights for the rest of us?
Sure. I think in addition to the money issue, the other part that we have to keep in mind is the professional competence, the resources that are out there that lay people can bring to so much that the church faces. And most of the time it takes initiative. An example, the outrage that followed the revelations of cover-up over clergy sexual abuse, it included many lay people coming adept at management and financial reporting and other fields, stepping up to the plate on their own. And today that's making a very big difference in ways that dioceses are handling funds and accounting. The Roundtable on Church Management is just one example of self-starting lay people not waiting to be asked. The group's changing the whole culture of accountability in the church and introducing all kinds of cost-saving management and planning measures. Still, lay resources and professional talent continues to be wasted by church leaders. That is to say, they insist on building clerical walls. So lay people, they lack a voice. They lack a voice on pastoral assignments, on who enters the seminary, on what's taught in those seminaries, who is selected a bishop, and on and on. You know, we just recently had the McCarrick report, and it evidenced corruption is at work in the process of selecting bishops and cardinals. And that will continue as long as lay people remain in the dark or are indifferent to the internal matters that, that we would consider very important. If they prefer to stay on the sidelines, you're going to get more of the same. I've stayed with this church because I continue to believe that despite its governance drawbacks and its failures, it is still the body of Christ. And the Catholic Church does more good for the poor, for the advocacy of human dignity, and offers more healing and education than any other single entity on the face of the earth. It's well worth the effort to try as best as we can to remember how much our broken world needs this community of love and hope and its liberating gospel message.
Okay, I hear you, and I think that I agree with virtually everything you're saying, but I also feel the same frustration that so many lay people feel. And I think laity have been trying to speak up, and often when they try to speak up, they get shot down. How, looking ahead, can you envision a kind of new working relationship between clergy and laity so that there is accountability and laity are involved in some form of decision making? We know that we have history, and I don't think people are advocating to become congregational, but I do think that unless we move to a new form, we're going to continue to bleed, and this isn't healthy.
Well, I think you've put the challenge very clearly. It is not easy. I think those years that I was working with wealthy people and the enormous frustrations that we experienced was evidence of just what you're saying. However, we were able to make change, and it was important change. In the two instances that I cited, to help with religious for their retirement needs and for the initiative for Eastern and Central Europe, those were clearly huge movements forward that were at first resisted by the hierarchy. But I think what we have to really work on as lay people is deepening our own faith to begin with. We have to understand what our baptism is all about, and we have to understand the baptismal equality that we have in the church. That comes first. Then office in the church comes second. We've got to break down that barrier of clericalism. And so that's going to take a long time, but it has to start first in each one of us understanding what our faith involves. And then we have to live a life that is a life of caring and respecting one another, of working closely with each other, and in a way where we're not dominating. One group is not dominating the other, and that's what clericalism is. And so we're together responsible for this divine mission. And it can be a very joyful thing, a sense of really belonging to one another. And that's why I chose that particular word to entitle my book, Belonging.
Great. I think on that note, Frank, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk. And let's hope and pray that we continue to advance the health of the church. And thank you for all the contributions that you've made over the years.
Thank you, Tom.
Blessings.
Blessings.